就是跟人家希望的路线的。你是是他们接受呀，是他们接受Bristol beginning Jerusalem. 7, 8 dayo gusto sa kalatyo. Chiya nalazeo beginning Jerusalem. Hingo de isturidale, isturanoni yaro, sanale isturni au, Dene Yati sanale mayatado. Por ello na paz es intereses ni. Por ello así sa donecho de Chartier almost gets us.
Ne chala nie ahus delsana, but every time we're late Alfred Cheecham, te nahal hun tata daju halt ala nahal yaltia. Pretty cool. I'm glad his grandson put that in the song and allowed me to have it. Masi cho salotine dlanot hello to nine dunzinege Dene Yati podcaster on it. Once again, see Willis Janvier Hushainin Taylor's tours in Laloche, Saskatchewan, Clearwater River Dene Nation band member at the Esclandela, and I come to you live. They seen Treaty 4 territory. It's actually home of the Cree, Métis, Sioux, Assiniboine, Dakota, Lakota, all beautiful indigenous people. Must see Choser. Hello to me. Adaru Johnson, Asalt Ozanda, Noazida was all and do Patricia Yazi, hello, honey, Winnipeg, Atlantic, and Nezu. Good tonight. I got a guest for you. Clem Chartier, Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, President Ranan Yedun Nohalya Tia the Siganai there a lot of Métis Dene all over Saskatchewan. I got 3 more weeks to send but the elections into. And so this week you get the Métis with Linen and DC boss because do Métis registered it on new, but the right selling through a cock as a deal, and I know Clem a base can I they're hunting to fishing rights. Koni see basu because as today, only status with the Koni see base they cannot deal on a could do Métis a allowed to hunt and fish dog LOC. This is the same, right? So a Koni see boss and I there's under Clem Chartier Hulye. So they give a couple more shout outs. I'll bring him in. Gabriel Tasani, hello, Atlanta. Lisa Karen, Atlanta, hello. Hello from Buffalo River, Jenna Sylvester, Atlanta, Jenna. Atlanta Tanzi from Treaty 6 territory. Nezu. Yeah, you come to see your grandpa live here on Dene Yati podcast. So yeah, with that, Clem Chartier. Hello, Clem. How are you doing?
Yeah, good evening. I'm doing fine, and thank you for hosting me on your podcast. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to our discussion.
Yes, it's gonna be fun. This is traveling in all different waters now. So this is a first for Dene Yati podcast, and I'll just get you to introduce yourself for the viewers here tonight, and we'll get going.
Well, thank you, Willis. As you said, my name is Clem, or as we say, Clem Chartier, or Clem Chartier, and I am from Buffalo Narrows is my home community. My background is I did go to the Illa-La-Crosse boarding school for 10 years from about the age of 5. And so I have that experience. Of course, as you mentioned, Tansy, my granddaughter, is listening, and hello, Tansy. And of course, her father is Chief Teddy Clark of the Clearwater River Dene Nation, my son. And I have been, of course, around Northwest Saskatchewan for a long time, including, of course, La Loche. I've spoken to a lot of the elders over the years. Louis Morn from Turner Lake. Of course, you have Robbie Fontaine, Jonas Clark, Pico Smogran, Charlie Moyes, and Ross Cummings, and a lot more, including women like Marguerite Crow Mogran, who was a Morris.
Mm-hmm.
And so in all these discussions, they told me how important the land is. And some of them told me how we got the land stolen from us through this scrip system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of us in La Loche, Isle Cross, Buffalo Narrows, Beauval, Pine House, we were dealt with by the Treaty 10 Commissioner, who also dealt with the Métis through a scrip. And of course, the Clearwater River Dene Nation people are more from towards the Alberta side, but eventually settled in La Loche. And I know my old friend Frank Pichet worked hard to get the reserve established, and it was finally established in the late 1970s. And so, the people connected to that reserve are, of course, Treaty 8, but of course, it's all the same territory. These are arbitrary boundaries, just have to be dealt with at different times. And when the scrip commissioner and Treaty 10 commissioner came to Ile-la-Crosse and La Loche, they entered into treaty with the First Nations people, with the Treaty Indians, as we called them in the past, so the First Nations, and with the Métis, they issued scrip, land or money scrip, and that was land scrip was worth 240 acres per individual, including babies. Well, not so much. So there was money scrip issued, to the parents for children. For example, my mom was 4 years old in 1906. And so her parents received her money scrip, which was worth $240, but only to buy land. And land was $1 an acre at the time in the South. And so the scrip commissioner also sat at West La Loche and La Loche Mission. And of all the people that got scrip or entitled to scrip who applied for it, never saw a piece of land. They got a certificate saying they're entitled to this land. And white speculators, about 8 of them, traveled with the commissioner, and they bought it up very cheaply. And they were never seen again. And supposedly 10 families from La Loche went to Lethbridge, claimed their land, sold it, and went back to La Loche. Of course, that never happened. And if it had, we'd have heard about it. But it never happened. It was all done through false statements, forgeries, impersonation. And Ross Cummings, I did interview him in 1976, and he said he got $60. They were supposed to come back, pay him the rest, and he never saw them again in his life. And he never traveled to Battleford, where supposedly in 1909 he redeemed his land and sold it. And so it was all just a sham, as they call it. It was just a big fraudulent transaction on our people. And
From
so,
the government.
yes, and so and the speculators that they allowed to fleece us of our birthright. And so for the treaty people, at least they were guaranteed X acres of land, which are called reserves. And because they didn't get it all, you had the TLE process in the 1980s for them to buy additional land or to secure more land. Many bought lands in the cities, which is a good economic base. And they were promised a schoolhouse and a medicine chest, so you have healthcare and you have education. So there were protections there, but for the Métis, there was none. Once they issued the script, they said, okay, we're done with you, goodbye. And it's over 100 years before we started seeing any relationship again with the federal government. But our elders were telling me when I was younger that, and I had gone to law school, they said, you have to work to get our rights recognized, to get our land back. We didn't know what we were signing. We couldn't read or write English. And so they just signed their X, and that was it. And so I have a firm belief that we need to fight for our rights, and I did. The first one was the Snowman case, Toby Mogra out of Turner Lake, originally from La Loche. We couldn't win that one because it was in a road corridor, but this set the movement going. And the next one is the Morin and Dayan case out of Turner Lake. Again, Louis Morin said, look, you got to protect or help these young people who were charged with fishing without a license. And they were commercial fishermen, but they were charged just with fishing without a license. And we won that case in provincial court in 1996, and it was upheld in the Court of Queen's Bench in 1997. And since that time, Métis in Northwest Saskatchewan have been able to hunt and fish, without a license, the same as Treaty Indians. So that was a big benefit for our people. No longer did we have to go, sneaking around, hiding our meat when we killed something, bringing it into town. Now we do it openly. And many young people don't realize, that we had to win those rights. I think they take it for granted now, which is good because it should be taken for granted. Those rights should have been with us all this time. So now the big fight is with respect to land rights, and we need to continue doing that. And we do have opportunities with the current Liberal government to, in fact, negotiate a land base. And prior to the last election in May of 2017, we actually had an agreement with the federal government for a negotiating table on land rights to settle our land claims. But unfortunately, the elected leadership, President McCallum, after he got in, said, no, there's going to be no table, and there hasn't been. So we could have been negotiating now for 4 years on our land rights, because many of us are still living in our original villages. So Île-à-la-Crosse is still an original village. La Loche is still an original village. Beauval is still an original village prior to treaty and prior to script. And we formed new ones after that by movement, but still the same people in the same geographic area. So all we're saying is we want to have our Aboriginal title recognized to the land. We still own, the Métis still own the lands in Northwest Saskatchewan. As people, we coexist, and we have joint responsibilities to ensure the land is protected and the environment is protected, but we can coexist. We have coexisting rights, and they're complementary. So we should be able to work, as a collective for the best interests of all the Indigenous or Aboriginal peoples in Northwest Saskatchewan. So that's a big thing that I want to look at. The other one is, of course, traditional resource use, and I've, of course, mentioned hunting and fishing. But not only for food, we need to continue with our commercial fishery and trapping to the degree that people still want to trap. But the commercial fishery is still big, but more and more every year, our commercial fishermen are getting smaller quotas, and the government seems to be protecting it for outside interests, for outfitters and for tourism or for sports fishing. And that's not right, because, we do have a right, to the commercial fishery, and I want to continue working on that. And it's very important. And just to finish that off, in addition to the rights that we have in the land and in the resources, it kind of sets the foundation for what's called the duty to consult and accommodate, because you have resource industries coming in, taking out our resources, whether it's timber, and more so further south, not so much around La Loche, but there was some cutting up in La Loche as well for a while in the 80s and 90s. But more, there's uranium and other heavy oil in, north of La Loche, and industry comes in. They owe a duty to both the First Nations and to the Métis to consult us and to accommodate us. And we should be getting not only jobs like we did in the past, we should be actually having partnerships with them, building partnerships. We should be looking at revenue resource sharing. I know they pay royalties to the provincial and federal governments, but they should be paying, if not royalties to our people, they should at least be revenue resource sharing. If they make $1 billion, then 10% of that should stay in the community, for example. And so we need to continue building on that, but that's based on our rights. So for the people with treaty, you're guaranteed continued use of the resources, but there's also the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement of 1930, where, First Nations people, still have, use of unoccupied Crown lands. But when they start taking more and more of your lands, they got to compensate you for that. And the best way is through, some kind of revenue resource sharing. And for the Métis, all of that I say we still own, and they got to start sharing what they're taking out of that with the owners, of that land, which are the First Nations and the Métis. So that's a big issue. And La Loche is very heavily impacted by what goes on to the north, and they're a direct impact. So is Turner Lake. There is a direct impact. There's lesser impact in the communities further south, but they're still impacted. But La Loche is the impacted area and needs to ensure that their rights are preserved. And essentially as well, La Loche has had a lot of social and economic problems, continues to. And one of the solutions that have been looked at is, an all-weather road from, of course, La Loche, from the turnoff to basically the highway that connects to Fort McMurray. And, the municipality, the village of La Loche, working with the Métis region in the 1990s, actually built, the all-weather gravel road, up to the border. But on the Alberta side, it hasn't been built. And there's good economic opportunities if that's completed, because a lot of people from La Loche rely on working, up in Fort McMurray and that area. In the winter, it's fine with the winter road, but in the summer, if you don't fly, you got to drive a way around. So that would help with the economic opportunities. But we also have to be aware that it also brings potentially social and economic issues, because it opens up, even more to, some of the negative things that could be brought in, from Alberta. And it would also bring a lot of tourists and others who may want to start, taking over our prime property by our, our nice lakes and such.
Buying land.
Yes. And so basically what we need is to get for the Métis, a land claim settlement where we have our own land base, but also that we convert our villages, like the village of La Loche should be under Métis government with an expanded land base. And all the residents should have rights, but under Métis law. And we should regulate, the tourism industry and who gets to participate. And it should be our people that have the preference. So we need to start protecting our people, because in the future, it could open up, and then we don't want to get swamped by outsiders like happened in Fort McMurray and waterways. Historically they were Métis and First Nations villages, but with the tar sand or oil sands development, all of a sudden there's a city there, and our people become shoved to the side. So we don't want to see that happen up in our area. So we need to have some kind of regulation. And I'll just finish off this introduction. And I said earlier, I went to the boarding school at Île-à-la-Crosse for 10 years, and we got excluded from the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement in 2006, 2007. And the neighbors to the south, the First Nations that went to the Beauval Indian Residential School, of course, were settled with. And so people like myself, and particularly other people, other students who aren't as fortunate as I was to continue with my education and be able to, provide for myself in all aspects. A lot of other people can too, but some can't. And I know we had a meeting in La Loche about 3 years ago, and about 40 former students showed up, and everybody is saying, why are we being treated differently than the First Nations? Aren't we also human beings, and aren't we also Indigenous people? So why should the federal government not deal with us? So that's one of the other big issues that we need to continue working on, as well as the 60s scoop, where many of our kids were taken out in the 60s and afterwards. And First Nations, of course, because of the capacity and lawyers willing to take on First Nations cases, because they know there's going to be a payout at the end of the day, not so much for the Métis. They've been successful, but again, the Métis are looking in from the outside saying, how come we're not being settled with? So that's a big issue. And a lot of these things happen, and we encounter a lot of problems, particularly with our youth in terms of drug and alcohol abuse, homelessness, and unfortunately, the suicide, epidemic that often, hits our First Nations and Métis youth, particularly, in northern Saskatchewan. So I think that kind of gives a broad idea of the things that I want to work on. I believe I have the experience and the education and the drive to continue working, on these issues. And I hope to be able to conclude those, or a good part of them, over the next 4 years.
Good stuff, man. I mean, that was quite the intro for sure. And, talking about land, La Loche has been hit, over 20 years ago, if not more, from the Tough Lake mine. And you still hear about this and how much, has been extracted from there, and then you get nothing. And then here we are, like, we're now dealing with those social issues, years later. And so if let's say you fight for, La Loche to be recognized as a Métis settlement, what does that, bring for the people of La Loche or Turner Lake, Buffalo Narrows, Alacrosse, those communities? What does that bring for the people, the Métis people?
Yeah, and I don't want to be taken mistakenly. We have a test case in Northwest Saskatchewan, which was agreed to in 1993 by the General Assembly, or Annual Assembly of the whole of the Métis Society in Saskatchewan, a test case. And that's still there. So we can resolve that one. But at the same time, I'm going to be looking at setting up a land commission, which deals with the whole of Saskatchewan, because the Métis in the south also got screwed basically by speculators and didn't get, the land either. And so basically, as far as we're concerned, they have Aboriginal title to the lands in the south as well. But a lot of them live in the city, so I don't think they're looking for a land base, but we can have a settlement which has compensation, and they can either decide to buy land with it for agricultural purposes, or they can buy businesses, set up industries, but whatever they want. But for the north, I know our people still are looking for a land base and self-government. And when we're successful, La Loche can determine for itself. And I keep saying, I know over the years, and talking about culture, and that's the other thing I wanted to stress, culture is so important. We've been having Palm Bear Day since 1977. The first meeting was called by Louis Morin and First Nations, the treaty people and the Métis. We met in 1977 to discuss the Clough Lake potential mine that was coming in. And people were saying, no, we need these safeguards first. Of course, they didn't really listen. They listened to us, but they didn't hear us. They went ahead anyway.
Yeah.
But still, people are saying we have to protect our culture. We have to protect our way of life. We can't keep allowing them to make outlaws out of us when we exercise our rights. So the elders were saying all of these things. But I also know over the years, like when I was a kid, and that's a few years ago, the elders used to speak Michif, including at La Loche, used to speak Michif, and Cree and Dene. They were multilingual, our elders. And since then, of course, at La Loche, Dene, the language Dene and the identity Dene has taken over. Because a lot of people don't say I'm Métis, they say I'm Dene, because that's the language they speak now. And in Illa-La-Crosse, Buffalo Narrows, Michif has been overtaken by Cree, because Cree is the dominant, like that language dominated, and Michif went kind of to the wayside. But we still identify with our cultures, and a lot of our cultures are intermixed. A lot of First Nations reserves, at least in the past, played the Métis fiddle music, danced the Métis dance. Like we were all, living together and doing things and sharing our culture. But when we begin negotiating, it's going to be based on the right of self-determination, and of course our right to a land base as well. And I've often said at meetings, or not often, but sometimes said, if the Métis population in La Loche and or St. George's Hill, places like Turner Lake, where there's Dene speaking Métis,
Yeah.
and Michelle Village. If the people there feel more comfortable to align themselves with the language and say, well, we would prefer to be part of the Dene Nation, that would be up to them to decide.
Yeah.
That right would be theirs. Or they may say, no, we're Métis, we want to have, recognition as Métis. But that's what the right of self-determination is. They can make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I know because in the past, some of them were saying we'd like to have a region that's only for the Dene speaking,
Yeah.
and not like Buffalo Narrows and, for South. So
Mhm.
there's so many opportunities. And again, a lot of it is based on culture. That's who you are. You are your culture, and
Yeah.
you are your language. And
Yeah.
so that identity is important to people. So I think that is something that, needs to be discussed. And as they build up, and we did this about 20 years ago, we had a project, it's called a tripartite project with the federal government, the provincial government, and ourselves in Northwest Saskatchewan. And we spoke about turning our Métis villages to, a land base with an extended boundaries, and
Yeah.
also having self-government, but that everybody within, let's say La Loche, everybody that lives there would have rights, but it would be under Métis government, right to own property, right to vote, right to seek office. Because, and especially if the Métis are the majority. Because in 1906, 1907, everybody at La Loche was Métis. There may have been in the records, one First Nations woman, but visiting from Clear Lake, which is now Turner Lake. They moved to Turner Lake. And so it was a historic Métis village. But again, there's been so much intermarriage
Mhm.
amongst the Dene First Nations and the Métis that, the lines are fairly blurred. And so where people fit in today is another matter, another question. But
Mhm.
assuming we get all that and we get our settlement, see, there'll be significant monetary settlement as well. I can't venture to say how much, but I would say it'd be in the billions of dollars, because we've lost a lot, and they're also going to have to compensate us for the loss that we've had for over 100 years. So it would be a big settlement, and so La Loche would be able to build up businesses, would be able to try to attract industry, and young people like yourselves should be able to determine what kind of industry would work there, and or maybe develop your own mines. I don't know, but there's opportunities where people could begin building up an industry, or perhaps build up on traditional resource use industries, ecotourism, rebuilding the methane portage so that people from Japan or Germany can come there and experience the way of life from the past. There's a lot of opportunities that could be opened up
Mhm.
with a land claim settlement for the Métis. And again, it would benefit the First Nations people as well, because our rights will strengthen your rights, and our economy will strengthen your economy. So it's kind of a no-lose situation for both the Dene people and the Métis.
Yeah. All about working together for sure. And especially staying on the topic of land there. Recently, there was a uranium company, I believe, in Turner Lake, they had to do the roadblock thing there. And let's say it all these things doesn't happen, and these companies are now coming in and taking over, not working in. What would that do, to the culture, the language, the land, if the Métis don't establish to help, these communities, because we should all be working together as one.
Mm-hmm. Well, if a mine like that probably just has so many years,
Yeah.
so they'll probably live in camps. They won't live in the village, so they won't outnumber the people in the village. I think the village would still stay, and they probably would offer job opportunities, like we used to say 30 years ago. We don't just want pick and shovel jobs. We want meaningful employment, training, and be part of management. And now we're saying we want part ownership, and we want revenue resource sharing. So the community of Turner Lake, for example, should be able to benefit from that. And they're in a strong position because the Morne Dial case is basically out of Turner Lake.
Yeah.
And the Queen's Bench has said that they have continued Aboriginal rights to hunt, trap, and fish for food. So it's only for food now, but I'm sure we'd win the commercial aspects as well.
Mm-hmm.
The big question is, do they still have the Aboriginal title to the land? But so they have an established right, but they've also asserted that they have Aboriginal title to the land through the land claim action that was filed in October 2019, because at least 10 or 12 individuals from Turner Lake are plaintiffs in that case. So they're sitting in a strong position of both established rights and asserted rights.
Just for the Métis alone, that's how that ties in together. And I know the hunting thing, that's obviously a serious thing. And many people, even myself growing up in La Loche, where you're worried about going fishing at the creek and maybe the CO's coming to take your fish or you're getting in trouble,
Yeah.
And you shouldn't have to, because generations before, they're already doing that. And that needs to be established for sure. And in each community, Métis, the Métis movement has been going on for, many years coming and forward as well. So, I like that. It's really, I like how you put all of it together for myself and the viewers to listen to, and how many cases have you dealt with about hunting and fishing as a lawyer?
Oh, quite a few. The second one, of course, was the, again, I mentioned the snowman case.
Yeah.
That, again, was out of Turner Lake. That's Toby Mogra. And, of course, it was a road corridor issue, so there was no way we could win. No one, including status Indians, treaty Indians, can hunt in the road corridor, because the week we went to trial in Buffalo Narrows, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld a conviction of two status Indians or treaty Indians from Patronac.
Yeah.
Because they're hunting in a game preserve, and you can't do that because they can regulate your right based on conservation. But we went ahead with it anyway. And in speaking to sentence, like there was supposed to be a $200 fine, and in speaking to the sentence, I spoke for about 20 minutes about how we got shafted by the Scrip Commission, or the Scrip Commissions and the speculators. And the judge at the end asked the Crown, well, how much do you want to settle? No, it was $100. Do you want to settle for that? And the Crown says, no. Last week you fined two treaty Indians $200 for the same thing. So the judge said $50, and everybody in the courtroom, there was a lot of elders, a lot of leaders that came to observe.
Yeah.
And we had brought in a lawyer from Vancouver as well. And everybody was just cheering. So a $50 fine was just a slap on the wrist, but he had to find something. Then we went to the Friendship Center. All of us, it must have been about 50, 60 of us from the region, with elders and with some of the M&S leadership. And we talked about what do we want to do. And that's where it was decided that we would take a land claim action, the big picture, not just fight one case at a time.
Yeah. And
that summer, as I mentioned earlier, the annual assembly of the M&S decided that rather than do a provincial one, let's do Northwest Saskatchewan, which is be easier. Yeah. And it was done the script was issued in 1906. And so they said, let's use that as a test case. And so that kicked that off. And so that snowman case was important for that reason. And then we had the Morne Dial case, as I stated, and we won that. And then there was a case in, it's called, first of all, Lovulette, because with Morne Dial, they said, okay, northern Saskatchewan, the Métis can hunt and fish for food, but only if you have a cabin living in the bush and you're like a traditional resource user. Like they put their own little rules around this. Then we had the Laviolette case, and he was from Meadow Lake. And that case established that the Northwest community, rights band community, went as far south as Green Lake, including Meadow Lake. And they didn't confine it to just people that were living off the land in cabins in the bush. So that it opened it up even further. And then we did one, I and another lawyer, actually, Michelle Leclerc, who was practicing law at the time, who was running for vice president, was co-counsel. I can't say I did it because she was there too. And I'm not putting in a plug for it, it's just a reality. We did that case where a Métis person living in Regina, originally, whose parents were originally from the Coppell Valley, he was charged with fishing without a license. And he says, but I have a right, I'm Métis. And he showed him his card. So we defended him. And in 2007, the provincial court ruled that the Métis in the Coppell Valley and surrounding areas, including the city of Regina, have the right to fish. And so that established their rights. And there's also Tullaby, Alfred Janvier from La Loche. In about 2006, going to visit his sister-in-law at Chart or Janvier on the Winter Road, about 8 kilometers over into Alberta, shot a moose. Resources came along, they charged him. And there again, I was asked to defend him. And I said, sure. And we had everything in place, all our expert witnesses, everything ready to go. In a week before trial, they phoned me up and said, oh, we're going to stay the case. Or in other words, drop the case. And so we went over there, myself, Tullaby, and we went to the court, and the judge says, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, we can't do anything. It's Crown discretion. So they dropped it. And so we went to the Métis local, and we had a press conference claiming victory. And they phoned the resource up, the press, or the one media person phoned the Alberta government in Edmonton, asked why did he drop the case. They said, oh, we knew it, we couldn't win it. So they were going to lose. And the implications of that is that's in the Fort McMurray area, like that whole area. And there's billions and billions of dollars worth of revenues coming out of there. So they didn't want to have the Métis be able to say, we have a established Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights over this territory. Because right now they're dealing with the Métis at Fort McKay, Fort McMurray on a good neighbor policy out of the goodness of their hearts, but not based on an established right like we have in Northwest Saskatchewan. They don't have an established right. And so the late Philip Chartier, who had asked me again to defend Tullaby, he and Alfred Tullaby went and set nets at Anzac and phoned up resources. They came there. Then they decided not to charge. Then about 5 years ago, again, Alfred and John L. Mograth from Turner Lake actually took boxes of fish to Fort McMurray, and outside the Friendship Center were selling fish and advertised it in the paper. A lot of people came. The fish went pretty fast, but then the resource, and on the way there, they set a net at Anzac again. At the lake there, and resources charged them. And then they came and they said, oh, well, we're going to go get our net. And resources came there and seized the net and the fish. And so they were charged. And then about 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, they phoned up again and said, oh, we're dropping the charges. They don't want, like we tried everything, even selling fish. And they don't want to charge people there because they know we'll win that case. And they don't want us to establish these rights. So those are the kinds of things that we've been doing. I set up in 2001 the Métis Legal Research and Education Foundation, where I do this free work or pro bono work on rights. And again, that's something near and dear to my heart. Again, it's because the elders, told me this is what, I need to do. And of course, we do want to follow what our elders tell us, and we do want to do what's best, for
Yeah.
our communities. And I'm not doing this alone. The Buffalo Narrows local, when under the late Philip Chartier, they actually did the fundraising.
Yeah.
For example, when we did the Bellamere case in southern Saskatchewan, basically the Buffalo Narrows local was the one that kind of did all the fundraising, not to pay lawyers, but to pay for travel for witnesses and things of that nature. And sad to say, not a dime came out of the South for that case in terms of donations. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, we feel an obligation to help whoever needs help. And Kathy Hodgson Smith, who was a practicing lawyer at the time, helped establish the foundation, went to law school after that, became a lawyer. And she's been doing pro bono work, although it takes time away from her practice. She's a
Yeah.
one person doing a practice. And so every hour she does free for these hunting and fishing rights cases is an hour she loses, generating income. And we just on a week ago today actually argued two appeals in front of the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal on a hunting and a fishing right that we had lost in Meadow Lake in provincial court and Queen's Bench. So
Yeah.
we still continue doing this because our people need help. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the MNS has refused to help them, even though they have the resources to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Very, very unfortunate. And in fact, Kathy has two cases going, and I'm helping her. One out of kind of Regina, Saskatoon, and the other one out in Yorkton, Harold St. Pierre in Yorkton. And so we continue to do those kinds of things, even though it takes up a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about the big picture, I mean, I know the audience, it's all Saskatchewan. I know you were just sharing about Northwest, but it's not just the Northwest, it's everywhere. Métis people are everywhere. And we always got to acknowledge all peoples, Indigenous peoples. And going forward with that, you talk a lot about and pretty much refer to it that you weren't recognized for many of years, and that's now what you're fighting for. And the boarding schools you talked about, pretty much the same as residential schools, where it's by the government trying to kill the Indian in the child, whether you
Yes.
may be. And why are you still fighting for that? And it all goes together, till this day, because I think people need to understand that it's not just about a title. It's the right, the land, everything. Indigenous people continue fight for today. And this needs to go somewhere, and that's what I see in you. And what do you see going forward about boarding schools?
Well, that's a tough issue because, again, this whole script system, when they
Yeah.
did that, they dealt with us as individuals. And I think for me, that was punishment because we stood up to them in 1869, 1870 in the Red River under President Louis Riel. And we negotiated entry into Confederation through the Manitoba Act. And then again, we stood up to them in 1885 at Batoche, and we had actual battles with Canada. Unfortunately, we were vastly outnumbered, and Riel surrendered himself, went to trial, and then they executed our leader in November 16th, 1885. Then they came up with the script system, and they treated us as individuals. They wouldn't deal with us as a collective. And that was one way to break up our strength as a people.
Yeah.
And after that happened, they kind of wiped our hands of us. They basically said, okay, we've dealt with you with your land rights, go away, goodbye. And many of our people ended up as refugees in our own homeland. And because in 1870, when we entered Manitoba, they sent troops to the Red River, supposedly to keep peace. But there was a 2.5-year reign of terror. There was rapes, murders, burning of houses, displacing people. So thousands of Métis moved out of the Red River after that, into Saskatchewan and Alberta to establish Métis communities or to establish new ones. So we've had that. After Batoche, people moved again. So we've been kind of on our own, trying to make our living on our own. And people, the Métis people in La Loche will know this. Not that we're envious, but our First Nations brothers and sisters, our cousins, and I saw this in the 70s and 80s. For fishermen, they'd get free nets, whereas we wouldn't. Things of this nature. And there's that disparity. And again, it's because of the treaties that the First Nations entered into. They protected themselves. Us, we didn't have a choice. They treated us as individuals. And so the same thing then with the boarding schools. In Île-à-la-Crosse, there was one residential school for all kids. Then when the treaty came in, they created the treaty kids and then the Métis. Well, I mean, they divided us, those in treaty, those that took scrip and not in treaty. And the school had burned down in Île-à-la-Crosse, so they built a new one in Beauval for the treaty people. And the rebuilt one in Île-à-Crosse was for the Métis kids. And the federal government paid the school at Beauval because of the treaty rights. The one at Île-à-Crosse, they didn't put much, if anything, in there. I understand our family allowance went there, but they didn't treat us the same way. And we had the same, it's run by the Catholic Church, same priests, same nuns, same brothers, back and forth. And so we suffered the same things. In fact, when I was younger, we used to try to excel at hockey and softball because we'd get a trip to Beauval and we'd finally get a good meal at the Indian residential school. And we thought, oh, this is great. These kids are being treated really well, but not knowing what goes on, behind closed doors. But also visually, like they were up on a hill. There was no fence. They were around the forest. And us, we had maybe an acre barbed wire fence yard to stay in, except when we go to school and stuff. So, and our food was horrible. And we suffered the same kinds of, physical, social, or sexual abuse, mental abuse. And so this is why we can't understand why the government will not deal with us. And the federal government has started talking. Even there, from 2007, myself and the foundation volunteered our time to assist the students to meet former students. But I was, removed, so to speak, by the MNS in, the winter of 2017. So that kind of discontinued my involvement in that. But we haven't gotten anywhere. About 2 years ago, the federal government, the MNS, and the school committee, although the school committee was just more bystanders, signed an MOU. But the MOU said if there's going to be compensation, the province has to be involved. But in 2010, I had met with the premier, and with the MNS, we met with senior officials, and they came back in 2011 and said they're not going to come to the table unless the government or the courts order them to be involved. And yet, 2 years ago, they signed this MOU that said the province has to be involved, and the province to this day is saying no. We're not going to be involved. It's not our responsibility. So we're caught in this bind. But also, I did in maybe the January issue of the Northwest Métis Chronicle, which is a monthly that the foundation started putting out last July. I did write about Operation Justice, where I've stated very clearly that whether I get elected or not, I'm going to head up a caravan to Ottawa, which will start at La Loche. We'll take petitions or have petitions signed by former students along the way and reach Ottawa before July the 1st and set up a camp there and bring our issue to the public because they keep shoving us under the rug. We want to put it up front and center. So that's one of the things that, I'm going to be doing, whether elected or not. So we are going to organize this caravan to Ottawa, to Parliament Hill.
Cool. Good stuff. I like how you're trying to bring everything together and also move forward, and also I believe in that because it's all about the youth and, making sure something is established for the youth to be a part of. Because nowadays, a lot of young people, they don't feel a part of and they suffer from, these social issues that you spoke about. And that with that comes mental health serious issues, and I like how you put it all together and move forward. And going back, well, let's say we establish a Métis, the communities. What do you think of Métis and working with First Nation bands, whether it's CRDN or Birch Narrows, or what do you think of that for the future?
Well, in Northwest Saskatchewan, and I use that because in Northwest Saskatchewan, there's 14 Métis villages and 8, reserves.
Yeah.
And we live together, and many of us are intermarried.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to act in isolation. If we're going to have anything meaningful in Northwest Saskatchewan, we're going to have to be working jointly on these things. And again, it's so fluid. We're kind of moving back and forth. In the South, it's different because the majority Métis population, or a big part of it, lives in urban, larger centers and cities. Some live in rural areas, but the proximity and the reality is different there. So they can be very well content being on their own. For example, in the big urban centers in the cities, they should be developing Métis self-government, Métis councils, and they should be seeking representation, guaranteed seat on the city council, guaranteed seat in the school boards elected by themselves, mechanisms like that. But where we are, we should, because many First Nations people live in our villages as well. And some Métis live on First Nations with their spouse. And many people speak the same language, do the same traditional, like we hunt the same. I mean, we don't shoot any differently or, fish any differently. And most of us continue with the Métis fiddle music and the Métis dancing, First Nations as well. So it's kind of a community in the sense where we could, learn to live and work together, and be such a great force that we'd have when industry comes in, that we act jointly. They can't, play us off one against the other, because, we both go in there with rights. Because the Métis, in the past, people view us as not having any kind of rights and, being ignored by the federal government and all of this, but that's changing. So the Métis, when we go to the table, are going from a position of strength. And so between the strength of the First Nations, the strength of the Métis as Indigenous peoples, with concerns in the same geographic area, we'd be much stronger if we did work together.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, Clem, we've almost reached the hour. I want to ask about the election. When is the election? And do you need a Métis card to be registered to vote? And how old do you have to be?
Okay, our Constitution states that any Métis 16 years of age and up has the right to vote. And currently, the Métis Nation Legislative Assembly has amended the Election Act to state that you have to have a card, or you have to have applied before March 28th or 29th, and have a letter from the registrar. I understand there's some 3,000 letters that are in the process of going out. Many have already gone out, but it's only those people that have a card or a letter who will be able to vote. And they say there's about 15,000 now out of the 60 or so thousand Métis that can vote. And I did challenge this. It is in the court. My lawyers argued this on Friday last week. And the judge, knowing that voting is going to start on the 14th, because everybody kept saying May 29th election. But at the end, my lawyers, and I sent them a message saying, no, the voting starts on the 14th. So the judge said he'll make a decision this week, whether he agrees with the application or disallows it. And then he'll do his written reasons later to say why he agreed or why he didn't agree. But this week, there should be a decision called a fiat that comes out, whether it's successful or not. I don't know which way it'll go. If my application is successful, then any Métis 16 years of age and up who have lived in Saskatchewan for 6 months will be able to vote as we have. We've been doing that since 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only now in February that the Electoral Act was changed to you need to be a card-carrying member or have applied for one and have a letter to be able to vote. So that's a big step in terms of taking people's rights away. Our Constitution says any Métis can vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it to court based on the strength of our Constitution because constitutions overrule legislation, but I'm not sure if the judge will even, what he'll do with that. So that's important. But the other thing is, which is more disturbing, is starting about 2 years ago, the MNS developed a policy that unless you had a card, you can't get a service from the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, like housing or scholarships and bursaries for a university. And even during COVID, a lot of people told me they couldn't get any money, well, whatever they got, certificates, money certificates, or baskets or hampers unless they had a card, which is not right because we've been negotiating. And again, we've been excluded for so long. We were excluded, continue to be excluded from the comprehensive claims process. We were excluded from the Métis veterans or the World War II veterans compensation, excluded from the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement in 2007, excluded from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Like we've lived a life of exclusion, and we're finally being included now. Mm-hmm. And in budget 2018, the first time in the history of the Métis Nation that we were included in the federal budget, and there was about $1.2 billion, $500 million for housing over 10 years, $450 million for early learning and childcare over 10 years. In the next budget, there was some 300 and some million for scholarships and bursaries for our students over 5 years, and then a 30 some or 40 some million ongoing each year. Like I may have that wrong, but the principle is there. We finally made these inroads, and MNS, well, the three prairie provinces, Métis, Manitoba Métis Federation, Métis Nation Saskatchewan, Métis Nation of Alberta, based on a formula that our General Assembly adopted, the Métis National Council General Assembly adopted, they get 25%. Mm-hmm. And Ontario Métis and the BC Métis get 12.5% each, kind of based on representation by population. So MNS gets, let's use housing. It's $50 million a year for 10 years. So MNS gets 25% of that $50 million each year, and they use it based on the programs that they develop. So that's a substantial amount of money, but they're getting it based on a population estimate of about 60 to more Métis in the province. But if they're only servicing, 15,000, then they shouldn't be getting that amount of money, because it's meant for everybody. So that's another issue, and those things need to be corrected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are some really good points, because who knows where that money's going when it could be used. And you shouldn't just have to have a card. And you talked about this whole hour of being excluded. Now our own people, hey, you're telling our own people we're becoming the oppressors and saying, hey, where's your card? Well, I can't give this to you. We shouldn't be doing that. We should all be coming together and working together to empower people. And then that empowers the youth, because, children see, and that's how they do. And I know for myself, my daughter is a Métis. We are going to get her a Métis card. And she knows that, right? She knows that her daddy's a First Nation, and she is a Métis herself because her mother is Caucasian. So, I like everything you talked about and the principles you operate on, Clem. Is there anything you would like to add, for the viewers here tonight? And
Well, some of the major Métis families back in the early 1900s, one of the bigger ones was the Janviers. And so the Janviers, have, Métis background, and you have the Jolibois, you have the Hermans, quite a hoping that your listening audience talks about some of these issues. Those that are Métis hopefully will get out and vote and make their voices heard. And if they are going to get out and vote, of course, I would like them to vote for me. But in the end, they vote for whoever they think will do the job best, for them.
Yeah.
But one thing not to forget, and there are some people, and one in particular, who won't vote for me, but that person has very been complimentary to me for taking the land claim going forward, fighting for the people, for those kinds of issues. And I would hope people that, thank me for taking, those bold steps and helping out on these really serious, critical issues for our people, stop and think, well, should I, help this guy along, or should I not help him? Because, I like the things he's doing, and I want our land rights, and I support our land rights. And why should I vote for somebody else, from the South who isn't going to be doing these things? So I don't know. I just hope that, again, people use their rational observations, and we are all rational beings, and look at who would best serve in this case. And I'm talking specifically, to La Loche and to Northwest Saskatchewan generally, but La Loche, because, my heart's in La Loche, and I want to see us move forward, and I want to see, things built up. And I've seen the despair, in La Loche of the young people over the years, and it's affected me too, my family, and we just need to look at what's the best way going forward, and doing it in a way that's going to be beneficial to everyone. And yeah, that's basically what I would like people to consider.
Cool. Good stuff, Clem. I want to say Masi Cho do no halya Dene Yati podcast is it, and Dene Yati is all about the language here, and yes, I want to say thank you for sharing all that information, because you went back 100 years, and 100 years later you're still fighting for those things, and I want to say thank you for that info, because it helps me, with my next guest, where I might have someone from the NWT that's going to talk about being Dene, and then where you put the Métis perspective into it. So they're always learning. Good stuff. Must see Choner Clem.
Okay, thank you, Marcecho.
Must see Cho. Hey, Kuti no halya tiere Clem Chartier de la MNS president Harana Nisi the Métis Nation Saskatchewan for May 29th at vote out Sunday. Get out if you applied for your card May March 28th. So, even though apply out Jelka, you should just do it anyways. There's so many benefits that Métis it's not, I know growing up, treaty they don't see it, no, free. It's more than that. I know the Métis and leading, you can get to buy a house. They'll help you out to buy a house. All those stuff. There's so many benefits to being Métis. You don't just go get your card, go register. And then, you get a card and a picture, and then you feel a part of, and that's a good feeling. We should all feel a part of. We shouldn't have to be divided, all come together. Dene Yati podcast here live tonight. Masi Chona Harusian Salot in a doing time. It's been a good educational podcast for sure. And yeah. Gabine no halyastia de nadlina da Kayla Benoit no halyastia mental health bosses. So don't forget to tune in tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Yeah, Masi Chona Harusian Salutina do so Dene Yati podcast. See Willis Janvier Hushe Nintelas Tuazi. Clearwater River Dene Nation band member at the SLU, and I come to you live in the Treaty 4 territory. Home of the Cree, Métis, Sioux, Assiniboine, Dakota, all the beautiful indigenous people. Masi cho, sell it and have a good night.